Good morning, everyone. I really wished I could have been there with you today. I am actually not in a bad place. I'm here at Princeton at the ETS Center where we're having a convening of state leaders on implementing educator effectiveness models. So it's a great opportunity to be here, to be a part of that conversation. But I also really wanted to be with you today and understand how important it is that we have this meeting, this face-to-face meeting, to discuss our training needs for next year and what support the Pattan Autism Initiative supports will look like. I wanted to just provide kind of a brief frame of what the agenda is today. Mike, Victor, and I worked on that agenda together, and so I'd like to just kind of situate the agenda for you in what is currently happening in Pennsylvania around evidence-based practices for educators. And I know, a lot of you are familiar with what's going on, but just want to give you an update as of what, is going on today. So really I have basically 4 things I'd like to talk to you about. The first is educator effectiveness and how our work fits in that, or is situated in that context. The large-scale IES grant that we're working with WestAd on, and I wanted to give you some update on that. The training, obviously, agenda for next year, and our supports for English language learners who have been identified as children with autism. If you haven't participated or you haven't heard the webinar where Dr. Dumaresque laid out Pennsylvania's vision for educator effectiveness, please send me an email. I'll be happy to send you the link. Mike and Amiris will be able to also share, the Harrisburg team will be able to share that with you. We had our meeting last week, our Pattan Harrisburg consultants meeting, and we participated or shared that. I shared that webinar with the staff. But it's really critical that everybody is aware of what educator effectiveness is in Pennsylvania and then how our work fits into that larger context. The educator effectiveness work really is becoming the language of instruction for the state. Educators are being defined as people that are working on instructional certifications, so our educators who are supporting children with autism would be under their instructional certification, but also it includes specialists, our school psychologists, our homeschool visitors, our elementary and secondary school counselors, nurses, and lastly it includes obviously our leaders, and the department is looking at principals and assistant principals as being the components that they're going to develop around educator effectiveness. As I think we brought stakeholder groups together in February. The instructional certificated staff were asked to think about what evidence might look like for their specific roles and functions, recognizing that they would be utilizing the Danielson model for their evaluations, but what evidence might look like. I have a very specific role and function, so what might evidence look like for me? The specialists are actually getting to revise the rubrics, so they're very excited about doing that. But the instructionally certified folks that have more unique roles and functions are working on the development of evidence. Amiris is our point person that has been working with that team on, with those teachers on what evidence might look like. And we're really being very analytic about making sure that the evidence that we are describing is evidence that is based in evidence and based in research. So that work of educator effectiveness basically frames everything we're doing, and the clear need to connect everything to the Charlotte Danielson framework for teaching is really critical. So as we think about our training agenda for next year, we must be making explicit links to the language of instruction that the state has adopted, and that language of instruction is the Danielson framework for teaching. If you haven't the most up-to-date framework for teaching, it's the 2011 version. Be happy to get that to you. If you go to the Danielson Group's website, you'll be able to download it. What is critical about that is that it has become more behavioral in the fact that it has defined specific attributes. As you probably know, if you've known the Danielson rubric, there used to be all of the domain, component, and then element level. Those elements have gone away, and they've really looked at targeting specific attributes and the critical need to just define the behaviors so that there is inter-rater reliability. I mean, when it comes to obviously evaluating teachers on this new rigorous assessment, it's going to be critical that that's being done in a way that can be justified. So the 2011 framework for teaching is the updated research-based framework that has come out of the MET study. So that is basically what all of our work needs to be situated in, because that's the language of instruction. So as we think about that and educator effectiveness, in the draft training agenda that we shared with you to get your input on, you'll see that we've made explicit connections across the board to Charlotte Danielson's framework for teaching. The second thing that I wanted to share with you, and we've crafted the agenda today to reflect this, is the large-scale grant that we are working with West at to apply for, most likely in the fall. Last summer, John Thomasini and Pat Ozella had talked with us about applying for this grant and working with Westat. If you're not familiar with Westat is a large data mining, basically, corporation that does a huge amount of work for OSEP, specific to data reports. So our pen data gets sent to them. They also do the NAEP, and so they're a really reputable research firm. And we began initial discussions with them last year, and I know I shared that last year at one of our meetings. However, since then, they have come out to Pennsylvania. They have gone to sites and evaluated what is happening instructionally in those classrooms as it relates to our technical assistance. And specifically, they have been looking at our site review tool. And as they look at that site review tool, trying to determine how they can use the data and the information to validate what it is we're doing on a large-scale basis. As you know, last year we had approximately 190 classrooms that were officially participating in the Pattan Autism Initiative ABA supports, with those supports being driven by the tool, the site review tool. So looking at across the board where folks are with regards to implementation, and then how our technical assistance is driven by that tool. And obviously not all of it, but dependent on the needs of that specific context. I know that some of you struggled last year with seeing the tool more in an evaluative way. What I really think is critical as we move forward is that folks are clear that this isn't about evaluating teachers in any way, shape, or form. It's about an information system for us, so we can evaluate our technical assistance, so we can say that what we are doing is actually contributing to effective implementation, or at least try to be able to attribute some relationship between our technical assistance and what's happening. So we need a measurement tool, and Westat has been very impressed with what they've seen with the site review tool, as well as the data that we've collected that looks at those who've participated in our ABA boot camps and their level of implementation versus those who haven't. So we've looked at lots of different variations. As we move forward, we see a large scale up across the state with potential resources for our IU partners in this grant. So what we wanted to make sure to do was to take time today, and I've asked Mike to do this, to walk you through the research from NAC, where the site review tool, how the site review tool was developed. So basically, how, the specific components and how they have been, are situated in the research. And I recognize that we're not going to be sharing that with teachers, but I do think it's critical that as we look at this tool as a way to get information, to look at our practice and how we can support scale up and implementation in supporting children with autism, that we're all using the same language and are able to speak to how that tool was developed. So Mike is going to walk you through some of the research from where that is garnered and link it specifically to items on the site review tool, so you'll be able to share that with your IU TAC partners. The next area that I just wanted to briefly touch on, as I said, is the training agenda. We've shared that with you to get your input. I know that Donna has been great in coordinating the work for kiddos with Asperger's last year. We have reached out, and I know that Donna, you had indicated that it's an area that you really think is in need in supporting our more higher functioning kiddos who have Asperger's. So you'll see in the training agenda that we have reached out to Bill Hewart to have him do next year a webinar series on research-validated instructional practices to support kiddos with Asperger's. And he is very excited about doing that. And we see it as a way to bring in an expert at low cost and do the webinars, which we're thinking is a very, very, seems to be an effective way to reach educators for initial information dissemination. So you'll see that in that training agenda that is an area of priority. Again, you'll see explicit links to the Danielson model in all of our work. As I said, we're working on the development of evidence, so as that evidence becomes more apparent, we'll be explicitly linking the evidence from the Danielson framework into our autism training agenda and our materials, our training materials. Last but not least, we are seeing in the central region, and I don't know if this is something that you're seeing in the east and west, but we're seeing in the central region, first of all, a large amount of English language learners who are being identified as kids with disabilities. And what's really, really unfortunate is probably a lot of these kids are not kids with disabilities. So another priority for our training next year is to look at kids, or to help educators think about kids who they are saying are on the autism spectrum because maybe they're nonverbal, but are level 1 ELLs. And is the school district doing what they need to do to ensure that they're putting language acquisition programs in place for those kids to develop English? So an understanding of the English language proficiency standards, an understanding of assessments that are required as a part of Title III, and whether or not those assessments have been conducted on these kiddos, and whether or not there's a link between those assessments and then what is happening in programs that are supporting them for special education. So another area that we'd like to focus on next year is supporting ELLs who are ELLs, may or may not be on the autism spectrum. I've been called out to a couple of sites, Mike, Katie, Amiris, we've been called out, Anna, looking at kids who are level 1 ELLs, but someone is, because of their inability to communicate and maybe some idiosyncratic behaviors, folks are finding them eligible under IDEA as children with autism. So we need to do a really clear, some really clear training next year on how do you differentiate what supports might look like. And for a child who is on the autism spectrum, who is an ELL, what are some of the considerations? What are some considerations assessment? What are some considerations around programming? What are considerations around interventions? So really going to be another critical area that we're going to look at. I want to thank you for your participation today as we think about improving our work and constantly looking at how we are improving. To move anything to scale, we need something that is going to be able to measure what it is we're doing. So we can't improve at scale unless we have some way to measure it. So as we think about that, for the Autism Initiative, looking at the site review tool is going to be critical that we all are speaking the same language. I recognize that in some parts of the state, I know in the East maybe there's not such specific need given implementation of other models, but I do want to make sure that everybody has the language for the site review tool, because I see a large scale up, and I just want to make sure that we are all speaking the same language when we're talking to our IU techs and our IU partners as well as our districts. So last but not least, Mike is going to share with you a list of sites that have expressed an interest in technical assistance as a part of the Pattan Autism Initiative ABA supports for next year. And we want to get you that list so we can make sure to coordinate that with your IU techs and make sure that our support is aligned and coordinated. So thank you very much. Again, I wish I could be there with you, but I look forward to hearing how the day went, and we'll be in touch as we look at ensuring our work is aligned, coherent, and supportive of children with autism. Thank you.